Well, joining me now is the journalist whose article Diane Abbott was responding to, Tomiwa Owolade, along with Black Lives Matter activist Imarn Ayton and former Labour MP Chris Williamson. Well, welcome to all of you. All right, let me start with you, Tomiwa. An extraordinary chain of events. You write a piece for The Observer, and you make an argument that racism in all its guises is racism. Seems a pretty straightforward argument to me. And Diane Abbott, who, to be fair to her, has been subjected to a lot of racism, particularly from social media, for being a black female MP. But then she writes this letter, and the letter is not just tone deaf. In my estimation, when I first read it, I thought this must be a parody, someone trying to deliberately mock her. It wasn't. It was genuinely what she believes, that somehow you can't be subjected to the same kind of racism as a black person if you're Jewish, or if you're Irish, or if you're a gypsy. She didn't explain how, well, what if you're a black Jew, of which there are a number of black Jews? Take me back to when you wrote the original piece. Did you ever imagine that someone like Diane Abbott would come forward and say this?
Definitely not. And I think it's worth emphasising that it's not just a case of Diane Abbott not imagining Jewish people being subject to the same kind of racism as black people. It's the case of her arguing that Jewish people can't be subject to racism at all. They can only be subject to prejudice, as she describes.
As if you have red hair.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean unbelievably crass analogy.
Extremely offensive. And many people rightly pointed out the example of the Holocaust, which was one of the greatest acts of racial atrocities in the past century. And yeah, so she subscribes to a very strange but increasingly popular definition of racism, which only looks at racism in terms of what she would call prejudice and power. So certain minority groups can't be victims of racism because they're not subject, they can't be discriminated against, basically, which is completely patently false.
When did you know about the letter?
I discovered the letter about 11 a.m. Yesterday. Yeah.
Quite extraordinary. OK, well, let's go to Chris Williamson. So, Chris Williamson, you were an MP. You had to leave an MP over the whole ongoing saga under Jeremy Corbyn of this issue of how the Labour Party deals with anti-Semitism. But today you were defending Diane Abbott. Why?
Well, Piers, in your opening remarks, you described her letter as an extraordinary rant. It was anything but an extraordinary rant. I mean, she was merely stating a fact. I mean, the truth is that Jewish people in this country don't experience racism by and large, and certainly not to the same extent as black Muslims and people from African Caribbean community. And as you said in her letter that you quoted from, I mean, she talked about the way in which, black people obviously were subjected to apartheid in South Africa, and that didn't apply in the same way to Jewish people or people from other backgrounds if they didn't have black skin or pigment to their skin. So I think what she was saying was really stating, an obvious fact, and it's been taken out or blown out of all proportion. There's a letter, 126 words long, and it's been blown out of all proportion by the usual suspects, exactly the same characters that came after me, that came after Jeremy Corbyn, that weaponised anti-Semitism. And you talked about, there could be black Jews, and you're absolutely right, there are. One of the most prominent black Jewish members of the Labour Party was Jackie Walker. She was the vice chair of Momentum. She was accused of anti-Semitism extraordinarily and was suspended and then expelled. We had children of Holocaust survivors who were members of the Labour Party who were accused of anti-Semitism, bringing the party into disrepute, and were expelled. And indeed, the Jewish Voice for Labour have done some number crunching, and they've calculated that you're considerably more likely now as a Jewish member of the Labour Party to be suspended or expelled than you are if you come from any other background, as it were. So, this is nothing to do in reality with anti-Semitism. This is all about trying to protect criticism or to prevent criticism of Israel gaining any traction.
All right,
and what they're doing is conflating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism.
I've let you answer at length. Why, in that case, has Diane Abbott unreservedly withdrawn her remarks and disassociated herself from those remarks?
Well, Obviously, you'd have to ask Diane, but I suspect it's because she's trying to save her parliamentary career. People are running scared. The worst thing you can do is to apologise, particularly to bad faith actors. I mean, there's nothing to do with... I mean, they're not really concerned about, anti-Semitism, and the truth is what they want to do is to destroy the last semblance of any support for the kind of socialist ideals and anti-imperialist ideals that Jeremy Corbyn represented when he was a leader of the Labour Party. Let's remember, the policies that Jeremy Corbyn put forward were very, very popular.
Jeremy Corbyn was suspended from the Labour Party after an investigation into anti-Semitism within the party under his leadership. Right, and this included... hang on. This included a former Labour MP, Luciana Berger, who described constant and violent anti-Semitic abuse. She said Corbyn supporters... hang on, no, you'll let me finish. Yeah. Called me Judas, a Zeo-Nazi, an absolute parasite, told me to get out of the country and go back to Israel. Labour's John Mann said his wife had been threatened with rape by a left-wing anti-Semite. Corbyn lost Labour whip after saying the investigation was dramatically overstated. But that's not what other people think. And frankly, when you are prepared to literally sit here now and defend Diane Abbott, saying Jewish people, along with travellers and Irish people, were not required to sit at the back of the bus, given that we know 6 million Jewish people were murdered in the Holocaust, including millions who were forced to sit literally in the back of buses and taken to their death in gas chambers. If you can't understand why...
Well, I've just pointed out... But
if you can't understand why that is not incredibly offensive to Jewish people, there's something wrong with you.
No, I'm sorry. There's something wrong with you, Piers, if we're going to get personal. When you're trying to sort of conflate what Diane Abbott said with some sort of Holocaust denial, it's an absurdity. And just look, let me take you back to what I said. Children of Holocaust survivors were accused, of Labour Party members were accused of anti-Semitism and thrown out of the Labour Party. People like Luciana Berger, these are right-wing neoliberals, and they're not... I mean, Zionists as well, let's also remember that. Same with John Mann. He's an out-and-out Zionist, and they are weaponising anti-Semitism shamelessly in order to try to, destroy that kind of anti-imperialist socialist project.
Look, and the reason that...
let me just make this point. Hang on, Piers, but there's just one important quote. It's really important you hear this one. Shlomo Aloni, a former cabinet member in the Israeli government, was on Democracy Now! 21 years ago, actually, and she was asked about this issue of anti-Semitism, and she said, these were her words, "It's a trick, and we always use it." And they use it, she said, in order to deflect criticism of Israel. And this is what this is all about. It's nothing to do with concern about anti-Semitism.
Well,
and people like Tony Greenstein, son of a rabbi, says that Jewish people in this country do not experience prejudice or racism. That's a fact.
Many Jewish people have stated, who live in this country, that they've experienced racism. And what Diane Abbott's letter did was it said that what Jewish people go through is never racism, it's a form of prejudice, as if you have red hair. That is a disgusting thing to have said about a group of people, 6 million of whom lost their lives in a Holocaust, purely because of their ethnicity
this is
as Jewish
to do
people.
With, look, Diane Abbott's record is second to none in standing up to racism. In the same way that...
She doesn't know what racism is.
For that matter, Ken Livingstone.
She has no idea what racism actually is.
In fact, Ken Livingstone... well, hold on a minute. I think somebody like Diane Abbott actually has got more idea about racism.
She thinks you can only experience racism if you're a black person. That's not true. It's palpably not true.
Well, no. Well, hold on a minute. If you actually look at what she said, she talked about bigotry and prejudice. People can experience prejudice, but racism is a different thing. I think she does make a valid point.
So you don't think Jewish people have been subjected to racism, just to clarify?
Well, I think Jewish people have certainly been in the past been subjected to racism and certainly have been subjected to bigotry and prejudice. There's no doubt about that. But that isn't the case today. And indeed, look, I was speaking to a rabbi today, in fact, who's doing a tour of this country, just flown in from the United States of America. And, he's very, very critical, as many Orthodox Jews are actually, of Zionism. And he said all religious Jews actually oppose the formation of Israel. And
yeah, okay, listen, I don't want to get into that argument.
I'm just about the weaponisation of anti-Semitism.
It's not the weaponisation
of
anti-Semitism. It is the existence of anti-Semitism. And when people like Diane Abbott, notwithstanding her own racism experience, when they deny Jewish people in particular, but also Irish people and travellers, all groups of whom have been subjected to appalling racism in the last 100 years. When you say that no Jewish people get racism today, that is just not only a barefaced lie, because we know they do. We know the rise of anti-Semitic attacks in both the UK and America is real. So you're denying
what are the
these people.
Statistics, then,
you're
Piers?
denying these people.
What are the statistics,
actual
Piers?
racism.
What are the
and
statistics?
what you don't seem to understand is by doing that, by downgrading what Jewish people go through, that actually makes you anti-Semitic.
But hold on a minute. What are Jewish people going through in this country in reality?
Why don't you ask them?
I mean, Well, I do. I speak to many Jewish people. I've just told you I'm speaking to a rabbi. I speak to people like Tony Greenstein, Jackie Walker, Cyril Chilson, the son of Holocaust survivors. His mother and father survived Auschwitz, and he was thrown out of the Labour Party accused of anti-Semitism.
All right, let me bring in.
Clearly nothing to do with anti-Semitism.
Actually, it's got everything to do with it. It's about denying.
It's
about denying the fact that Jewish people are subjected to racism. Let me bring in Imarn, who's been waiting patiently. Imarn, look. I read that letter and I was horrified by what Diane Abbott wrote, because there shouldn't be a competition for who gets the highest grade of racism. Racism is racism is racism. That's it. And Jewish people are subjected today to racism and to anti-Semitic attacks. We know this. So when people who have literally recently been members of our parliament deny that, and when people like Diane Abbott, who've been shadow cabinet ministers, for goodness sake, when they talk in this language, if you're Jewish or if you're Irish or a traveller and you've been subjected to proper racism with very dangerous consequences on occasion, you find this sickening. You think, how could this be happening in my country?
OK, so I think, well, not I think, her statement was inaccurate, ill-informed, ill-advised. It was an ill-conceived, clumsy attempt to explain the nuances and complexities of prejudice and racism. So where did she go wrong? When she spoke about prejudice versus racism, and of course when she alienated everyone in the process. So let's just be clear, what is prejudice? Prejudice is a preconceived thought. Everyone has it, it's unavoidable, and it's also the foundation of every form of discrimination you can think of, including racism, sexism, misogyny, homophobia, and anti-Semitism. What is racism? It is the manifestation of your racial prejudice, and that can be towards an ethnic group or racial group, which includes Roma, Gypsy, travellers, etc. And how does all of this manifest? It manifests itself overtly, which is racial prejudice, that is obvious, deliberate and direct. It manifests itself covertly, which is racial prejudice that is subtle and discreet. It manifests itself institutionally, which
you're
is the culture
using
of
the
prejudice.
phrase...
Hold on a second, let me get there, please.
Okay.
Institutionally, and last but not least, global racism. So I actually am trying to tell you that that is the point I believe she was trying to make. I believe she was trying to...
But she didn't make that point.
Hold on a second. I told you she made it clumsily. I think
She
what
didn't
she was
clumsily.
trying to...
She didn't make that point.
No, but she was,
you're
she was
giving
trying to
her,
get there.
you're giving her a pass and a way out,
Let
something
me
she never said.
No, let me finish. Let me finish. You spoke about the things that she referred to in terms of the ships, etc. What I'm talking about is the racist system of global oppression and exploitation of black people. That's ultimately what I think she was trying to get to, and that differs to the everyday experiences of discrimination. She clumsily tried to make that point and didn't make it.
Let me bring Tomiwa back. You've heard varying degrees of defence for this. What do you make of it?
I think it's still indefensible. And she was quite plain as well in what she said.
Yeah, it wasn't ambiguous.
Yeah, there was very little room.
I've seen people really working hard to try and give her a way out.
She was inaccurate.
She must have meant this, or must have... I think she knew exactly what she was writing. It's a letter to a newspaper editor for publication. You know, you get every syllable right. I don't believe all this initial draft nonsense. It's a lie.
Yeah, it wasn't a sort of throwaway tweet or a Facebook comment. It was a letter intended for public as well. But
you've heard someone who was a Labour MP until very recently just state as a fact that no Jewish people are subjected to any ongoing racism whatsoever. That is a demonstrable lie.
Yeah, it's a demonstrable
Because she
lie.
was inaccurate. That's the point. She confused.
No, I'm not talking about Diane Abbott. I'm
racism.
talking about the Labour MP who just got...
But even still, you're still
MP.
saying that it's indefensible. She made an inaccurate comment and failed to present her argument cogently.
No,
That is
okay.
what she did.
Look, we've got to leave it there. But the truth is, I don't think she stumbled or misspoke. She wrote a letter to a newspaper with quite deliberate phraseology, and then all hell broke loose, and now she's trying to lie her way out of it. And that, I'm afraid, is almost as shameful as what she originally wrote. Anyway, got to leave it there. Tomiwa, thank you very much indeed. Who would have thought a column could spark this kind of thing, right? Quite amazing. Imarn, thank you, and Chris Williamson, thank you.